Chapter 2309. Lon Error tugged at his sleeves and asked softly, "Yi Sansan?" Yi Muyun said impatiently, "If you call me Sansan again, I'll make this Sansan a reality." Xiao Ishu didn't understand, but Cher did. She blushed. "Ishu." Lon Error shut his mouth. Yi Muyun carried him and asked for a VIP ward so that he could be observed at night. Lon Yu was also in the hospital, so Cher didn't have to run around. After Xiao Ishu was settled, she lowered her head. "I'm going to check on Lon Yu." Yi Muyun got up, turned around and looked at her. His gaze was deep and serene. Cher felt a little uneasy. She had a feeling that he would be unhappy. She pursed her lips and said with difficulty, "He saved me, I can't just ignore him." Yi Muyun's thin lips moved slightly, but with Ishu around, he didn't ask anything in the end. Actually, he wanted to ask her if she couldn't ignore him or not love him. He smiled. "Go ahead." Cher was a little uneasy. "Thank you." "There's no need," he said calmly. "Don't ever say that to me. I'm your brother." She looked up at him, her eyes watery. Between them, ever since she woke up and he said that he was her brother, he had never acted like a brother. She felt that he was more like a lover. Snow had fled. She had fled in panic. She didn't even dare to look at his eyes. She admitted that she didn't have a backbone. She was afraid of him and enjoyed his care at the same time. She had forgotten many things. She only remembered what happened in New York, and it was a blurry memory. At this moment, she was no better than Xiao Ishu. She relied on him, but she didn't want to give or change anything. Because she didn't want to let Lon Yu down. She pushed open the door to Lon Yu's ward quietly. He was still lying there quietly. Cher's throat felt a little tight. She slowly walked over and half-knelt in front of his bed, carefully looking at his face. He was a little pale, similar to how she remembered him, but she could clearly feel that he had lost weight. She reached out and gently caressed his face. "Lon Yu, wake up, okay?" Naturally, he did not respond. "I'm scared." She put her face on his waist and rubbed it gently. "I don't know who I am. Perhaps only you can tell me. I hope that you can tell me everything. Tell me why your sister wanted to kill me." The Lon family had lost their daughter and son. She had no place in the Lon family. She could only rely on Yi Muyun, but it was so dangerous. "Lon Yu," she murmured. "Will you wake up? If it never happens, will you regret it?" People who will never wake up won't regret it, because there's no chance. Yi Muyun's voice was gentle as he stood at the door of the ward. He had originally planned to give her some privacy, but in the end, he couldn't help but come over. Cher turned her face and looked at him. After a long time, her lips moved slightly and she said softly, "Do you know Lon Ting?" Yi Muyun's heart trembled. Lon Ting was already dead, and Lon Yu had become a vegetable. He didn't want her to think of those dark things again. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know her. I don't think you know her either." Cher's voice became softer. "Yi Muyun, can you take me to where Lon Yu lives?" Chapter 2310. "If you don't want to, then I'll go by myself." She looked at him and said softly, "I know. I stayed with him at the GM hotel." Yi Muyun's throat tightened. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Okay, I'll wait for Ishu to be fine." She nodded and went to the bathroom. She wrung a hot towel and carefully wiped Lon Yu. After wiping his face, it was his neck. Then, she gently unbuttoned a few buttons and began to wipe his body. Her movements were very gentle, for fear that she would make Lon Yu uncomfortable. Yi Muyun leaned on the side. He watched for a long time as she treated another man with such gentleness. He remembered that she had never served anyone in her life. Now, she was taking care of a man in front of him. Yi Muyun closed his eyes and couldn't bear to watch anymore. Because there was no room for him to say anything. At this moment, in her heart, she should do anything for Lan Yu. He left first and quietly smoked a cigarette in the smoking area at the end of the corridor. When the cigarette burned out, he smiled bitterly and looked at the sunset outside. He went back to the ward on the top floor first. Xiao Yishu was scratching her neck with an anxious look on her face. "Didn't you say that you can't scratch?" Yi Muyun took 2 steps forward and stopped him. "Be good, don't scratch it." In addition to disfiguring her appearance, Xiao Yishu would bleed. It wouldn't be fun if she didn't stop bleeding. He reached out and held Xiao Yishu in his arms. He gently rubbed the place he was scratching and asked softly, "Is it still itchy?" The little guy lay in his arms with tears in his eyes. "A little better, but it's still very healthy." Yi Muyun kissed his forehead. "Then Uncle kissed your little butt again, okay? Uncle is so perverted." Xiao Yishu looked disgusted. The young nurse pursed her lips and smiled. After measuring the child's temperature, she said, "Mr. Yi, you can give the child a warm bath. He might feel better that way." She ruffled Xiao Yishu's hair again. "Just bear with it a little longer." Yi Muyun nodded and accepted the nurse's suggestion. However, the little guy covered his little body and said proudly, "I don't want to take a bath. It will be more comfortable to take a bath." Yi Muyun picked up the little fellow with one hand and walked towards the bathroom. The VIP ward was really good. The bathroom even came with a super luxurious bathtub. But even so, little Blue 2 still cried out, "I don't want to take a bath." "You have to shower even if you don't want to." Yi Muyun patted his little butt. "Don't tell me you're afraid of showering. Is he still a boy?" Little Blue 2, Yi Muyun was afraid that he would run away, so he let go of his hand while still holding the little guy. A fatherly feeling arose in his heart. This was his child. He had not personally given him a bath yet. It was a good opportunity to take a good look at his own flesh and blood. Mr. Yi was in a good mood. When the water was almost full, it was time to skin the little guy. Little Yishu let out a shrill scream. It was a shrill scream. "Why are you acting like a girl?" Yi Muyun chuckled. But the next second, he couldn't laugh anymore, because something unexpected had happened. Who told him that Xiao Yishu was a boy? At this moment, he clearly saw that little Yishu was a girl, without a doubt. Yi Muyun was stunned. Yi Sansan was stunned. Chapter 23:11. Yi Muyun's fingers were trembling. The little yellow bun that he had been longing for was right in front of him. She was a little girl. He suppressed the joy in his heart, not knowing what to do. Xiao Yishu cried, "Of course I know." "Then, does your mother know?" Yi Muyun asked. Xiao Yishu's eyes were brimming with tears. "I don't know if my mother knows." Yi Muyun let out a long sigh. He felt like killing someone. At that moment, he could be sure that Cher really did not know that Xiao Yishu was a girl. Otherwise, she would not have told him that Xiao Yishu was a boy and that he could not spoil her too much. If he went back to New York like this. He did not dare to think about it. Idiot. What a fool. With great difficulty, Yi Muyun suppressed the complicated emotions in his heart. He picked up his cell phone and made a call, giving a few simple instructions. Then, he picked up the little fellow and held her in his arms. He kissed her forehead and held her in his arms. Xiao Yishu struggled but could not break free. She cried, "Uncle, you're a pervert. If you say you're a pervert again, I'll hit you. Yi Muyun threatened as he kissed her again and again. It had to be said that in Mr. Ye's heart, a boy's position was much lower than a girl's. Previously, he had despised LoveLore, but now he loved her so much that he could not bear to let her go. He kissed her again and again, feeling that the little fellow in his arms was fragrant and soft. Girls were indeed different. Soon, there was a knock on the door. Yi Muyun wrapped the little fellow in a towel and carried her to open the door. The door opened and a nurse came in with a few bags. Yi Muyun took them and closed the door. Back in the bathroom, he put the clothes aside and then poured the rose petals from the other bag into the bathtub. He put the little girl in and let her soak. He squatted by the side and carefully poured water from the honeysuckle to gently wash her. He held the little arms and legs. The more he looked at them, the more he liked them. They were exactly the same as when Cher was young. They were both chubby and fragrant like milk buns. Yi Muyun was almost fascinated by the smell, feeling that he was about to die from happiness. A milk bun. He hugged it and carefully washed it, feeling that he was a little perverted. Xiao Yishu could not stand his enthusiasm and teared up. I don't want to soak in roses. Only girls soak in roses. Be good, you're a girl. Yi Muyun's heart was burning. She reached out and rubbed the little fellow's hair, then kissed him again. Our little Ishu is not a boy. Xiao Yishu's voice was aggrieved. But I like to be a boy. Yi Muyun looked at the little fellow's short hair and felt sorry for Lan Yu's family tree. However, when he looked at his little girl, he was still gentle. But Ishu is a girl. LoveLore screamed, I don't want it. But the newly appointed Yi Sansan insisted on letting her wear a small skirt and a small floral bra. All of these made little Blue Second feel ashamed. Her little body was wrapped in lace and it looked awkward no matter how one looked at it. I don't want to wear this. The little fellow's emotions were especially strong and she cried out. But how could the little fellow's strength compete with Papa? Chapter 23:12. Short hair and a pastoral-style dress. It was awkward no matter how one looked at it. Although Lan Ishu was also very pretty. But in Mr. Ye's eyes, it was not awkward at all. He thought it was very cute. He carried her out of the bathroom and kissed her. LoveLore was disgusted. When Cher came back, she saw Xiao Yishu struggling with a look of disgust. She was stunned for a moment, then looked at the little boy. Ishu. Mummy. The little boy cried out and pointed at Yi Muyun. Uncle insisted that I wear a girl's dress. Cher was still in a daze. She looked at Yi Muyun. Ishu is a boy. Mr. Yi closed his eyes. He knew it. This idiot. He looked at Xiao Yishu. Tell your mummy, are you a boy or a girl? Xiao Yishu's eyes were filled with shyness and she did not speak for a long time. Cher was a little confused. After all, she had been with Xiao Yishu for 5 years and she did not know that her son was a girl. She looked at Xiao Yishu. And the little boy lowered his little head and said pitifully, Mummy, I don't want to wear a dress. Cher almost fainted. She pursed her lips and looked at her beloved son, finally accepting the fact that this was her daughter. If not for the fear of hurting the little boy's pride, she would probably want to have a checkup. Cher was even more shocked than Yi Muyun. She stared blankly for a long time and did not come back to her senses. Seeing that there was no hope, Xiao Yishu burst into tears. She did not want to be a girl. She liked short hair and wearing little suits. The clothes she was wearing were so ridiculous. What? She did not want to. The little boy cried sadly and wailed. His allergy, however, healed miraculously. And Cher had also walked out of the sadness of seeing Lan Yu and was speechless for a moment. However, none of these could stop Mr. Ye's joy. Mr. Yi placed the little princess on the small bed and paced around. After thinking for a while, he said slowly, "No, that kindergarten is too simple." He said that the #1 kindergarten in B City was too shabby and unworthy of his daughter. Cher felt dizzy. She still couldn't accept this reality, but he seemed to be very happy. Why was he so happy? The child wasn't his. At this moment, Cher really wanted to wake Lan Yu up. He didn't tell her that Xiao Yishu was a girl, and Xiao Yishu was raised by him. How could she not know? Cher was deeply ashamed. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at Yi Muyun. Meanwhile, Mr. Yi had already made a call to Guze and ordered, buy a kindergarten immediately. Conduct a strict check on the quality of the teachers and students. Oh yes, only girls are allowed. He decided that he wanted his little baby to grow up in an absolutely pure environment and get rid of the negative things that Lan Yu had brought to her. Yi Muyun hung up the phone and looked at his little baby lovingly. He couldn't help but kiss her again. Cher, who was at the side, had a feeling that she had fallen out of favor. Did he like girls that much? He liked them so much that it was almost perverted. Moreover, he didn't seem to like Lan Yu. Why did he like Lan Yu's child so much? Cher looked at him for a long time and felt a little disgusted. She looked at him with a meaningful gaze. Yi Muyun looked up and looked at her. He smiled and didn't say anything. Xiao Yishu cried and was hugged and kissed by Yi Muyun. Chapter 23:13. No matter how unhappy Xiao Yishu was, she was still spoiled by Mr. Yi. In the evening, the red gizzards on Xiao Yishu's body slowly disappeared. After the doctor's reassurance, he brought them back to the villa. Xiao Yishu was in a very low mood. Cher kept her company, so she forgot to go back to the hotel to get Lan Yu's things. In the study on the second floor, Yi Muyun sat quietly with a cigarette in one hand and a file on the table with the other. These were found in the GM hotel. He flipped through it, but there was nothing important in it. There was only a sketchbook with Yishu and Cher drawn on it. Sometimes, both of them were drawn together. Yi Muyun gently stroked the lines. He didn't know how to draw, but he could feel that the person who drew these drawings was full of feelings for the people in the drawings. Lan Yu loved Cher, but she didn't know. She didn't know. Perhaps it was Yi Muyun's luck. He didn't dare to think that if Lan Yu had expressed himself earlier, would she be standing in front of him and calling him brother, or would she really be by Lan Yu's side like before and be a happy wife? Lan Yu was such a deep man. As long as he wanted to give it, he would definitely make her happy. Yi Muyun's slender fingers gently closed the sketchbook and closed his eyes slightly. An opponent who was silent. But he was everywhere. He called Guze. His tone was calm, but it was depressing and heavy. Go to New York and find Lan Yu's previous residence. No matter what it takes, bring back everything about Lan Ting and Cher. Guze was silent for a moment and nodded. Okay. After hanging up the phone, Yi Muyun slowly leaned back in the chair behind him and smoked quietly. He would never allow her to live with Lan Yu for those 5 years. He would never allow Lan Yu to affect their future. He placed his hand on his forehead and felt a headache coming on. Cher was easy to arrange, but what about Yishu? This child had always thought that he was Lan Yu's child. 5 years old was enough for him to understand many things. How could he let Yishu know that he was her biological father? Yi Muyun sat alone in the study for 2 hours. When he went out, he saw Cher at the door of the study. He looked behind her and smiled. Where's Xiao Yishu? He fell asleep. Cher pursed her lips and looked at him. She doesn't want to be a girl. She doesn't want to wear dresses. She's making a scene. Her eyes were sparkling as she looked at him with a pleading look. Yi Muyun looked at the sky and walked downstairs. She naturally followed behind him. Do you mean to let her wear boys' clothes again? Raise him as a boy? Yi Muyun walked to the middle and suddenly stopped, turning her head to look at her. Cher bit her lip and said softly, she has to take some time to adjust. After saying that, she realized that his eyes were burning. She didn't have the face to continue pleading. Yi Muyun smiled. I don't know what you and Lan Yu were thinking before. Forget about Lan Yu, but you. Is it because you didn't give birth to Ishu, so you let it be and let Lan Yu decide a lot of things? Cher's eyes widened and she bit her lip. No. No. But you don't even know whether Ishu is a boy or a girl. All these years, is she your child or a toy? Chapter 23:14. Yi Muyun looked at her. He wasn't angry at first, but he got angry as he scolded her. He found it funny and infuriating at the same time. Cher pursed her lips and lowered her head. He didn't say anything for a long time, so she stole glances at him. After taking a glance, she quickly lowered her head. She thought to herself, I've fallen out of favor. He seems to only like Xiao Yishu. She didn't know why, but she felt sad. Her eyes became misty and she didn't say anything for a long time. Yi Muyun's heart softened. How could he not know what she was thinking? She was a child and Lan Yu came to her with ulterior motives. She wasn't the one who gave birth to Xiao Yishu. She might have found a surrogate, so it was possible that he didn't want her to know about it. He realized that he had already found an excuse for her and felt helpless. He ruffled her hair and said, let's eat first. With tears in her eyes, she followed him downstairs reluctantly but ate more than he did. After they were done eating, he brought her back to the study. Cher sat on the sofa, feeling a little awkward. Do you think she'll be able to make a comeback in another 2 years? Yi Muyun looked at her seriously. A 5-year-old is at the age of curiosity. You want him to wear a suit, have a crew cut, and go to the women's toilet. Cher didn't say a word. Lan Yu is very ambitious. Yi Muyun cursed that man again in his heart and said calmly, you don't have to worry, I'm here. His last sentence was said in an extremely gentle tone, even tender. Cher looked a little stunned. After a long time, she suddenly asked, is it because of Ishu or because of me? It's because of you. He gave her a firm answer. Then, she became even more stunned. Yi Muyun smiled and walked over to stand beside her. He reached out and gently pulled her into his arms. Snow lifted her head and stared at him helplessly. I will always be here. He pressed her little face into his arms, his voice very soft. Cher was in his arms. He had hugged her many times, and every time he hugged her, his eyes were as clear as jade. But this time, she felt different. It was a very, very warm feeling. He was like an older brother. He hugged her for a long time. Under the dim yellow light, they hugged and felt each other's warmth. She knew she shouldn't be doing this, but she didn't want to struggle at all. Suddenly, she felt like crying. She choked in his arms and said, I don't know what happened to me and Lan Yu. I only remember that when I woke up, I was with them. She raised her head, her face streaked with tears. But I can't abandon you. Yi Muyun's gaze was deep. Was this idiot trying to lay his cards on the table? Was she trying to tell him that even if she didn't love Lan Yu that much, she was going to keep her chastity for Lan Yu? He was sure that she had feelings for him and wanted him. He couldn't be more clear about her body. Yi Muyun reached out to stroke her long hair and smiled gently. I know. He only said these 3 words and nothing else. She looked at him in a daze, her lips moving slightly. Yi Muyun smiled. What's the matter? She shook her head. How could she admit that she was a little disappointed? Chapter 23:15. Cher wanted to speak up for her, but she didn't dare to. It was fine when Yi Muyun was at home, but if he went to work, Xiao Yishu would change her clothes. She hated little skirts. Although Xiao Yishu had been raised as a boy, she had a soft and cute personality. Now that she was raised as a girl, her temper was much worse. Cher couldn't do anything about it. Moreover, she didn't dare to let Yi Muyun know. Day after day passed. One afternoon, she and Xiao Yishu had finished lunch and were lying comfortably in the exposed room, basking in the sun. The afternoon sun was warm, and the 2 little ones were facing the sun, so much so that their foreheads were sweating. When Qin Mu came over, she saw such a scene. She sighed. Although Cher used to be a good-for-nothing, it wasn't easy for the mother and daughter to be like this together. She had heard from her brother that Xiao Yishu was his child, and it was a girl. After knowing that, she looked at Xiao Yishu and found that she looked surprisingly similar to Cher, especially her eyes. She didn't look like Lan Yu at all. Qin Mu sat by the side and watched quietly for a long time. Cher woke up first and looked at Qin Mu. Are you Qin Mu? Yes. Qin Mu sat on the sofa opposite her and smiled. Cher sat up and wiped her sweat. She said to Sisterly, pour 2 cups of fruit tea. Sisterly nodded and turned to go downstairs. Qin Mu looked at her. You are doing well. Yeah. Cher's face was a little hot. It's good. Your brother is very good at taking care of people. Qin Mu didn't even think before saying, he's my blood-related older brother, but he's more like your older brother. Cher was stunned. Although she knew that she and Yi Muyun grew up together, she never dared to ask in detail. She was afraid that the more she knew, the more she would be doomed. Qin Mu continued, my brother went to the Tang family when he was 10. He already liked you back then. Cher's eyes widened slightly, and her face was filled with shock. After a long time, she said with difficulty, were we together? You 2 have always been together. Qin Mu's eyes were filled with warmth. Big brother loves you very much. But then you separated. Qin Mu lowered her voice and said heavily, it's because of me. Cher couldn't digest it all at once. Besides, she and Qin Mu weren't familiar with each other. All of a sudden, Qin Mu had told her so many things. She was astonished and slightly afraid. She was afraid of missing out, and even more afraid of being hurt. Instinctively, she knew that it would not be a simple story. Images flashed through her mind, but in the next moment, her head started to hurt again. She hugged her head and said in a painful voice, don't say any more. Qin Mu was shocked and immediately went over to help her. Then, she saw that Cher's face was pale and there were big beads of sweat on her forehead. She was frightened and immediately called Yi Muyun. Then, she helped Cher lie down. Big brother will be back soon. Are you in a lot of pain? Qin Mu was about to cry. She kept rubbing her scalp, hoping that she would feel better. Cher bit her lip and said in a broken voice, no. It's not very painful. She opened her eyes and the 2 girls' eyes met, the bitterness, the sweetness, and the feeling of innocence overwhelmed Cher. She didn't even have the chance to recall it before she fainted. Chapter 23:16. In the bedroom full of masculinity, Cher lay quietly. Qin Mu stayed by the side and looked at her blankly. She felt extremely guilty. She wanted to help her brother, but it seemed that it was the opposite of what she wanted. Yi Muyun and the doctor whispered by the door. The chief surgeon of Xingyuan Hospital was full of worry. "Mr. Yi, it's better not to stimulate her nerves. If it continues, it will cause damage to her cranial nerves. At that time, her memory may not be complete. Instead, it will be chaotic and eventually lead to insanity." As for the result of insanity, he did not say it. Mr. Yi should understand it in his heart. Yi Muyun looked back at Cher. His gaze was a little complicated. Then he smiled lightly. "I know." How could he bear to force her? He knew that Qin Mu was probably anxious. But he felt that as long as Lan Yu did not wake up, he could wait for a lifetime. What difference did it make if he was her brother or her husband? After sending the doctor away, he walked over slowly. Qin Mu stood up at once and said guiltily, "Brother, I didn't expect this to happen." Yi Muyun patted her and smiled lightly. "I know." Qin Mu pursed her lips and then looked at him. "So you plan to take care of her like this? Will Xiao Yishu always treat her as Lan Yu's child?" Speaking of Xiao Yishu, Yi Muyun remembered that the child was wearing a boy's clothes just now. Why did Cher still indulge her child at home? But now she was lying here. Of course, he could not bear to blame her. He said lightly, "I'll take it slow." Ishu's surname would definitely return to Yi or Qin. When he found a reasonable and perfect explanation, he would let Cher and Ishu know that the little fellow was his son. He bent down and reached out to touch Cher's forehead. After making sure that she had calmed down, he went outside to smoke. Qin Mu followed him and apologized several times. Yi Muyun looked at her and laughed. "Silly." He put his arm around Qin Mu's shoulder and said in a very indifferent tone, "Mumu, I'm very satisfied now." Qin Mu froze. Yi Muyun tilted his head. With a cigarette between his fingers, he took a long drag. If Cher was the one who ended up in a vegetative state in this car accident, or if Lan Yu did not save her, what would have happened to her? He couldn't imagine it, and neither could Qin Mu. She was in a daze as she murmured, "If that's the case, Big Brother won't be able to survive either." "Yes." He just nodded and replied indifferently. For a moment, Qin Mu wanted to cry because she knew that he was serious. "If she hadn't come back and never let me see her again, I might have spent the rest of my life missing her or hating her. But now that she's back, I can't let anything happen to her." Yi Muyun's voice was deep. "Mumu, do you understand?" Qin Mu forced a smile, rested her head on his shoulder, and did not say anything. Yi Muyun looked at his sister and said softly, "I heard that you and Zhou Chongwang have reconciled." Qin Mu replied after a while, "It's not that I've reconciled. It's just that." Yi Muyun let out a long sigh and said, "The 8% in Zhou Chongwang's hands is now in your hands, right?" Qin Mu was startled. She left his shoulder and took a step back. Her whole body was a little tense. "Brother, how did you know?" Chapter 23:17. Qin Mu didn't dare to say anything, so she just looked at him eagerly. Yi Muyun reached out to press her shoulder and said seriously, "Mumu, you're not to blame for what happened 8 years ago. But if you want to sacrifice your future for me, you don't have to, really." Qin Mu was a little moved. Her lips trembled for a long time before she said in a low voice, "Brother, no, I didn't." Her voice was even lower and trembling. I really haven't let go of him. Yes, I haven't let go of Zhou Chongwang." Yi Muyun's eyes were a little deep, and he kept looking at his sister. In her eyes, he saw shyness and embarrassment, which made him believe that what she said was true. He pursed his lips and finally sighed softly. "Return the shares to Zhou Chongwang." What I want is your freedom. But Qin Mu refused. It's mine now. Yi Muyun didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Mumu, you don't believe in my ability. No. Qin Mu was a little nervous. I'm afraid that one day it will really be like this. I'd rather be the bad guy. He didn't force her to do what she had decided. He just smiled. Originally, he wanted to ask Qin Mu to stay for dinner, but Qin Mu had something on her mind, so she couldn't eat anymore. She drove back to Qin Garden and told her mother about Yi Muyun and Cher. After hearing this, Yi Liangqiu was silent for a long time. Since Cher returned to City B, she hadn't had a chance to talk to her properly, and she didn't expect that she would forget everything. What happened 8 years ago was a pain in Yi Liangqiu's heart. At that time, in order to save Qin Mu's life, she sacrificed the happiness of Mu Yun and Cher. If that child remembered it, she would hate her. Mom. My heart ached when I saw Cher like that. Qin Mu was half kneeling in Yi Liangqiu's arms. She said in a low voice, "It hurts when I look at you." The feeling of not being able to get what she wanted was something she could only understand when she knew that Zhou Chongguang didn't love her. And this feeling would only be magnified countless times when it came to her brother and Cher. The saddest thing for Qin Mu was that she had been treated well by everyone, but fate had never spared her brother and Cher. She was sad and full of remorse. Even being with Zhou Chongguang was a sin. That man was trying to make it up to her. She could feel it, but it was different from the way she used to love him. She became cautious, she became overthinking things, and she also became a little less concerned. When he came back late, she wouldn't ask. It wasn't that she didn't care, but she was subconsciously prepared for him to cheat on her again. She even thought about how she should deal with such a thing if it happened again. Their marriage at this time was twisted, but she was powerless to change it. Yi Liangqiu let out a long sigh. She couldn't comfort Qin Mu, let alone herself. Fortunately, at 6:00, Zhou Chongguang came over and stayed for dinner with Qin Mu. As for Zhou Chongguang, Qin Anlin didn't want to see him as much as he could, because it gave him a headache. 8 years ago, he had beaten this guy up. 8 years later, this guy had let Mumu down and done so many bad things, but now he could still be with Mumu. Qin Anlin was a father, so he naturally didn't like a bastard like Zhou Chongguang. Chapter 23:18. Zhou Chongguang was also a perceptive person. He saw that Qin Mu's eyes looked like she had been crying. After the meal, he didn't stay any longer and left after a short while. Qin Mu wanted to drive by herself, but he stopped her. His warm hand held her little hand and he said mildly, "I'll send you over tomorrow." Qin Mu looked up at him, and her little hand instinctively struggled. Not only did she fail to break free, but he held her even tighter. Zhou Chongguang. Qin Mu called his name, but there was a hint of exasperation in her tone. He had been with her for a long time recently, and he understood her character very well. He couldn't help but laugh. "You're taking it out on me, huh?" Qin Mu didn't want to argue with him at her parents' house, lest they got worried. She still got into his car, but she ignored him after that. Zhou Chongguang didn't disturb her. He reached out to adjust the rearview mirror and started the car. The black sports car sped through the night. Qin Mu's eyes were looking out of the car window, and she had no intention of paying attention to him. When they arrived at the villa, she opened the car door and walked in front of him. Zhou Chongguang slowly unbuckled his seatbelt, helped her take the things that she had thrown in the car, and followed behind her. Perhaps Qin Mu didn't realize that after they were together again, she had become a little forgetful. She wasn't like this in the past. In the past, she was very restrained, and she usually didn't have the opportunity to let him do these things. He actually liked the current her more. She was real, a little petulant, but cute. However, she didn't notice this herself. It was actually because she relied on him, or perhaps she didn't worry about personal gains and losses. He followed behind her up the stairs and into the bedroom. Qin went in and threw herself onto the big bed. He closed the door and placed her things on the sofa. Then he walked over and knelt down on one knee beside her. "You're tired. I'll carry you to the bathroom to take a shower, okay?" Qin opened her eyes and looked at the handsome face in front of her. She had to admit that Zhou Chongguang was treating her very well now. The man who cared about the family seemed to be especially gentle, and he seemed to have gotten rid of many of his bad habits in an instant. He usually didn't go out to socialize at night, and on the contrary, he liked to make demands from her. Sometimes, she couldn't take it anymore and simply asked him to go out. It didn't matter if he went to a bar or a clubhouse, as long as he didn't bother her. That night, Zhou Chongguang pressed down on her and didn't let her go the entire night. It was only when the sun rose that he bit her lips and said in a low voice, "Mrs. Zhou is so generous." After that, she no longer dared to say such words, nor did she dare to provoke him. She had never known a 28-year-old man to have such abnormal stamina. After that, they became more harmonious. They did it 4 nights a week, and every night, it depended on his mood. Qin didn't reject him either. She was also a mature woman, and she had needs, so she wasn't pretentious. It was just that she had been taking pills behind his back all this time. At this moment, when he leaned against her and spoke, she could feel his emotions stirring. She couldn't help but close her eyes. "Zhou Chongguang, you only came twice last night." He smiled almost inaudibly and bent down to kiss her lips. His voice was low and husky. "But during your period, I had forbidden jade for 4 days. Qin glared at him. Was that forbidden jade? Even during her period, he never let her go and would always use other methods. Chapter 23:19. Qin glared at him for a while and closed her eyes again. "Hurry up." It wasn't that she didn't want to refuse, but she knew that it was useless to refuse. She wasn't in the mood, and he would let her go after doing it once. She lay in his arms and panted. If she didn't cooperate, he would force her to do it. Zhou Chongguang wasn't in a hurry to hold her to take a bath. Instead, he pulled a wool blanket from the side and covered her with it. He pressed her into his arms and asked in a low voice, "You're in a bad mood, huh?" After a while, Qin grunted. She didn't want to talk to him. This was the biggest problem between them. Qin refused to communicate with him. She wouldn't say anything good or bad. Of course, when he wanted to communicate with her body, she wouldn't refuse. However, Zhou Chongguang's heart was empty, and he couldn't describe the feeling. He had her, but he felt that he was losing her. He knew that if he didn't open her heart, she would fly away. Once she flew away, she might never come back. If you're in a bad mood, you can tell me. For example, if you don't want to do it, you can tell me. He really made a promise on impulse. However, Qin tilted her head and looked at him. "Zhou Chongguang, I don't believe that you don't know that I don't want to do it." He chuckled softly and reached out to pinch her little face. "After that, you enjoyed it too, didn't you?" He whispered shamelessly into her ear, "You're moaning so happily. You're a lowlife." Qin broke free from him and lay down on the side with her back to his body. She said faintly, "It's just a physiological reaction." Zhou Chongguang was a little frustrated. He wanted to hug her, but Qin had already gotten up. "I'm going to take a shower." He knew that she wanted to take a hot bath so that she could kill him. In addition to taking the medicine, she also prepared double insurance. For some reason, he was a little angry in his heart. It was probably because he had been suppressing it for a long time. His fingers suddenly locked onto her waist, not giving her a chance to leave. He stared at her with a burning gaze and said word by word, "These few days are your fertile period." Qin Mu's heart tightened, but she maintained a calm expression. So. Zhou Chengwang was hurt by her coldness, but he was still patient. "Qin Mu, let's have a child." Qin Mu refused without thinking. "Zhou Chengwang, I'm selling myself to you, but there's no buy one get one free service." Zhou Chengwang dragged her into his arms, lowered his head to kiss her lips for a while, and then said in a low voice, "Mumu, our child will be the crystallization of love." Qin Mu was in a trance. "Love?" she murmured many times before her mind became clear. "No, I don't want children." After that, she struggled violently. "Let me go. I want to take the medicine." Zhou Chengwang's eyes became dangerous, and he exerted more strength in his hands. He stared at her and narrowed his eyes. "What if I don't let you take it?" "Zhou Chengwang, you bastard." She reached out and slapped him. He didn't dodge and took it. Qin Mu was stunned. She was hugged and kissed by him. He kissed her fiercely as he took her to the bathroom. Qin Mu screamed, "Zhou Chengwang, what do you want to do? Aren't you going to take a shower?" "I'll take you to take a shower." His voice was low and hoarse, and his voice was extremely warm. Chapter 23:20. Of course, she was angry as well. After she was washed clean, she laid on the bed and ignored him. After Zhou Chengwang acted violently, he regretted it a little. He had not been this rough with her ever since they got back together. But now that he recalled what happened earlier on, he got excited from head to toe. But considering her body, he suppressed it and coaxed her softly, "Does it still hurt?" The last time they did it, she kept crying out in pain. He was too heartless and did not let her go, tormenting her for a long time instead. Qin Mu ignored him and turned her face away from him. However, her face was a little pale. Zhou Chengwang could not help but get worried as he whispered in her ear, "Let me check, Qin Mu glared at him. "No." He smiled. "We've done it so many times. What's wrong with checking?" In the end, he still checked for her. Naturally, she did not cooperate. Eventually, he pressed down on her waist to prevent her from moving and checked her thoroughly. There were indeed some abrasions. Looking at it, he felt a little guilty and heartache. "I'll go get the medicine." Lie down obediently, he reached out and caressed her long hair, saying in a low voice. Qin Mu pursed her lips and did not say anything. The medicine box was downstairs. Zhou Chengwang put on his black pajamas and headed downstairs. When he came up, he saw Qin Mu swallowing some pills. The medicine bottle beside her was a little glaring to him. His long fingers held the medicine bottle and his gaze was restrained. Standing by the door, he said softly, "Qin Mu, what do I have to do for you to forgive me?" Qin Mu's body froze for a moment. Then, he turned back and looked at Zhou Chengwang. After staring at him quietly for a long while, he said, "Zhou Chengwang, it's not a matter of forgiveness between us. It's a matter of trust. Obviously, I still don't think you can be a qualified father." Her voice was soft. "You can't even be a good husband. At least, I haven't decided yet." After listening to her, he calmed down a little, as though he had accepted her explanation. He did not say anything else and only lifted the blanket. "I'll help you apply some medicine." Qin Mu was holding a glass of water and almost spilled it. She stared at him for a long time before saying in a hoarse voice, "No need." This method of applying ointment was too shameful. However, she still couldn't win against him. When it came to matters between a man and a woman, he would do whatever he wanted. Zhou Chongwang still got what he wanted. As he lightly applied medicine for her, his voice was also a little indifferent. This afternoon, my mom called us and asked us to go home for dinner tomorrow. After he finished speaking, Qinmu abruptly raised her eyes to look at him. Her expression was somewhat startled, and then she said somewhat self-deprecatingly, "She probably just told you to go back to eat alone." Qinmu gasped lightly, "Zhou Chongwang. Zhou Chongwang." His hand paused for a moment. After he was done hastily, he tidied up her clothes and slowly twisted the medicine bottle before saying firmly, "You're going back with me tomorrow." His words further strengthened Qinmu's resolve. She said faintly, "Zhou Chongwang, why must you do this?" She bent her body and leaned against the headboard, resting her little face on her knees. Her expression was rather gentle. "You clearly know that your mom doesn't like me." Because of this dislike, she would only visit old Mrs. Han once during Chinese New Year in the 4 years of marriage. Old Mrs. Han's face had never hidden the disgust on her face. In the past, the reason why Zhou Chongwang didn't care was probably because he didn't care about her. Chapter 23-21. After Qinmu finished speaking, Zhou Chongwang pursed his lips into a straight line and looked at his wife. Her face was full of rejection. It wasn't that he didn't know that the reason why his mother didn't like him, apart from his father's accidental death, was because of children. He was already 28 years old, and the old lady had always hoped that he could have a child. A while ago, when Qinmu asked for a divorce, the old lady was in favor of it. She even said to him that the next daughter-in-law had to have a child before they got married, so that it would be safer. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he also wanted a child in his heart. With a child, those gloomy past seemed to really be over. He looked at his wife and said slowly, "Tomorrow is my birthday. My mother gave me the longevity noodles." Qinmu didn't find it good to refuse, so she said in a muffled voice, "Then I wish you a happy birthday." Zhou Chongwang stroked her red lips with his slender fingers and smiled faintly. "If you can kiss me, I will probably be happy." Qinmu was a little stunned. But she quickly came back to her senses. Zhou Zong doesn't lack kisses from beauties. But now, I only hope that you can kiss me. His voice was unbelievably hoarse. Before Qinmu could come back to her senses, her body was hugged by him. Zhou Chongwang hugged her a little tightly. His face was buried in her neck, and his hot breath was on her skin. His voice was a little painful. "Qinmu, do you love me?" Qinmu's body froze. She didn't expect Zhou Chongwang to say that. She knew that he wasn't asking her, but himself. He was confused. Just like she was also confused. They were making do with each other now. There was no lack of ex-life, but he was still lonely in the end. Qinmu struggled for a while, but she couldn't break free. He hugged her very tightly. After a long time, she stopped struggling and let him hug her. Her voice was soft. "Zhou Chongwang, if you can go out and find someone to drink with. That way, you won't be bored." His body stiffened, and his hands seemed to loosen a little, but in the next second, he hugged her even tighter. "Qinmu, I really want to strangle you to death." He couldn't be more clear about what she meant. Qinmu chuckled. "Zhou Chongwang, really, I don't need you to force me. There's no point in forcing me." She pushed him away gently, and this time he didn't stop her. "I'd rather you go out now than afterwards," she whispered, looking at him. He stared at her with a burning gaze and narrowed his eyes. "You're just afraid of falling in love with me again, aren't you?" "Yes." Qinmu didn't deny it. She sighed softly. "Look, you're already feeling bored now. How are you going to spend the next few years? I don't feel bored or lonely. His fingers fell on her shoulder, and he thought for a moment before saying, No, I'm lonely because. Moo, I don't feel your love. Qin Mu smiled faintly. Zhou Chongwang, I'm sorry, but I can't force you. Sometimes, it took courage to give. He understood what she meant. He dragged her into his arms again and pressed her hard against his chest. He pressed his face against hers and said in a low voice, Moo, don't say such words again. I won't go out either. Qin Mu didn't say anything. If he was unhappy, she wouldn't say it in the future. But as she said, she couldn't force him to love her, and she didn't want to force him. Chapter 23-22. Zhou Chongwang didn't force her anymore. He took off his clothes and hugged her to sleep. This was what he insisted on, hugging her to sleep every night. Qin Mu was quite speechless. However, as long as he didn't go overboard, she would let him be. She opened her eyes and rested her head on his shoulder. She was surrounded by his fragrant scent. Originally, it should have been a blissful feeling. However, whenever she closed her eyes, she would think about how many women had slept on this body and how many women he had said those sweet nothings to. If she thought too much, she would naturally not be able to love him anymore. However, she couldn't deny that he was very skillful. She could enjoy it when she did it with him. After a long time, Qin Mu fell into a deep sleep. However, Zhou Chongwang looked at her the entire night. He naturally knew that she had something on her mind. In the middle of the night, Zhou Chongwang still got up and went outside to smoke 2 cigarettes. When he came back, his body was a little cold. When he approached her, she avoided him. In the end, he pulled her into his embrace forcefully. She struggled for a long time before settling down. In the middle of the night, she didn't wake up. Good girl. He looked at her eyes. They were still young and beautiful. Gently, he leaned forward and kissed her on the forehead. His heartbeat actually sped up a little. He rubbed his forehead and laughed. They were clearly an old couple, but at this moment, he was like a young boy who couldn't control himself. If it weren't for her body, he would probably do it a few more times. At 28 years old, he wasn't considered to be hot-blooded anymore. Especially in the past few years, he had gotten a little crazy. He actually wasn't that interested in women anymore. However, when it came to his wife, it was as though he had been injected with village medicine. He wanted to do it every night. However, he still restrained himself to do it about 4 nights a week. It was because he didn't want to scare her. He didn't want Qin Mu to think that he was a crazy man who wanted to hug a woman every night. He dimmed the bedside lamp and closed his eyes. However, because he was overly repressed, it made the desire in his eyes even more vivid and uncontrollable. Zhou Chongwang turned over and Qin Mu woke up. She asked in a daze, "Why aren't you sleeping yet?" He paused and did not dare to move again. He looked at her black head in the dark and said in a low voice, "I'm sleeping." His large palm pressed into the center of her hair and gently rubbed it, allowing her to sleep more soundly. When he did that, he didn't do it on purpose. He just did it. Then, he felt that it was pretty good. Lowering his head slightly, he pressed it against her little face. In a moment of impulse, he said those 3 words, "I love you." After saying that, he did not regret it, as if he felt that he should have said those 3 words at this time. After saying it out loud, he realized that he had indeed fallen in love with her. He loved her indifference, and even loved her lack of love. Qin Mu said that he was cheap, and he admitted it now. He deserved it. He held her in his arms like he was holding a child, kissing and kissing her lovingly. After wandering for so many years, his soul had found a home for the first time. Qin Mu woke up in his arms. How could she not wake up when he made such a big movement? Especially when he whispered those 3 words into her ear. It made her tremble. He said that he loved her. And he said it when she was asleep. But when she heard it, she felt like crying. Why didn't he tell her that he loved her when she loved him? But now, she closed her eyes and could only pretend to be asleep. Chapter 23:23. Qin Mu avoided his kiss and said in a weak voice, "Zhou Chongwang. What are you doing so early in the morning?" He didn't stop, and his breath was messy. "I'm asking for my birthday present." In the end, he still took her down. Qin Mu closed her eyes and bit her lips. "Hurry up. Didn't you say you were going back at 9 o'clock? Zhou Chongwang paused for a moment and raised his hand to pick up the watch on the bedside table. "It's only 7 o'clock. He lowered his head and kissed her. "Get up at 8 o'clock, okay?" That beast. It meant that he had to prepare for an hour. Qin Mu grabbed his black hair and said angrily, "Zhou Chongwang, go find someone else." She had used so much force, but he continued to do it without changing his expression. Qin Mu felt the pain for him, however, when comparing a man and a woman, she still behaved herself. She bit her lips and finally began to scold him. Zhou Chongwang immediately covered her mouth. "This medicine is good. It recovers quite fast." Qin Mu, his timing was just right. It ended at 8 o'clock. He washed her in his arms and helped her put on her clothes. When they went downstairs, Qin Mu's legs were weak. She bit her lips and stared at him. Zhou Chongwang, on the other hand, was refreshed. He asked the servants to heat a glass of milk and put it in a thermos cup. He took it himself and held Qin Mu's hand as they walked out. "Let's go to Mom's place to eat noodles. You drink some milk first." Qin Mu ignored him and sat in the car and drank half a glass of milk. Zhou Chongwang looked at her quietly. She glanced at him and drank the milk in the cup, making it clear that she wouldn't share it with him. He just smiled and didn't argue with her. The car started slowly. After driving for about half an hour, they arrived at a quiet old house. It was the old house of the Zhou family. Zhou Chongwang bought a new villa for the old lady, but the old lady refused to move. In the end, Zhou Chongwang did not force her. The car stopped, and he opened the door to get out. Qin Mu followed him out and watched him take out a rectangular box from the trunk. He walked towards her and held her hand. "Let's go." Qin Mu struggled. "Let go of me. I can walk by myself." Zhou Chongwang firmly held her little hand and walked towards the hall. Before they reached the hall, Qin Mu heard a girl's laughter coming from inside and was stunned. Because there were no girls in the Zhou family, only men. She raised her head and glanced at Zhou Chongwang. His face was calm, as if he didn't find it strange. Qin Mu tugged at his hand, paused, and lowered her voice. "Zhou Chongwang, you knew it, didn't you?" "Knew what?" He stopped and looked down at her. Mu, I don't know anything. I only know that you're my wife." Qin Mu was angry. This man, however, now that they were here, it was impossible for them to go back. Moreover, she had come in his car. When Zhou Chongwang appeared with Qin Mu, the old lady of the Zhou family was about to introduce them with a smile on her face, but then she saw her daughter-in-law next to her son, and her face darkened. Why did Chongwang bring Qin Mu back? Wasn't Qin Mu asking for a divorce? The old lady forced a smile. "You're back." Chapter 23-24. Aunt Zhou said that the relationship between Zhou Chongwang and his wife was very bad and that they were going to divorce soon. She said that today was his birthday, and the relationship between the two families was very good, so she came. But now, the couple came back hand in hand, so her appearance was particularly embarrassing. The girl was not stupid. She forced a smile and said, "Aunt Jo, I'll come again next time." Mrs. Jo knew that it was not appropriate to say anything at this time, so she personally saw her out and turned a blind eye to Qin Mu. The girl naturally felt it. When she turned around to say goodbye, she smiled at Zhou Chongguang and said, "Brother Chongguang, let's make an appointment again." Qin Mu's face stiffened, and she wanted to shake him off with her fingers. Zhou Chongguang held her fingers hard and looked at the girl with a smile. He remembered something and said, "Xiangqin, your sister-in-law and I will treat you to dinner alone next time." The girl named Xiangqin understood that she probably had no hope. Although she was disappointed, she still gave a smile, opened the door, got in the car and left. Mrs. Zhou wanted to say something, but in the end, she didn't say anything. Watching the white car leave, she sighed softly. When she turned around, her expression had changed. "Chongguang, why don't you see Xiangqin off? She just came back from studying in England. She is 24 years old this year. Do you remember? She used to follow you when she was a child." "I remember. Her hair was very yellow when she was a child, so I called her Little Yellow Hair." Zhou Chongguang smiled. Mrs. Zhou's face darkened. "You only remember these things." Zhou Chongguang smiled and then handed the box in his hand to Qin Mu. "Mom, this is the gift that Mumu and I chose together. Mumu has a good taste. It's a rare necklace made of Eastern pearls. Take a look." Qin Mu was a little confused. Only now did she know that it was Eastern pearls, but in order to avoid being too embarrassed, she still handed the gift to Mrs. Zhou. How could the old lady not know that it was her son who bought it? She had not been nice to Qin Mu all these years. How could Qin Mu buy a gift for her? However, it was a little thought-provoking that Chongguang brought her back. Thus, the old lady took the box and smiled faintly. "Thank you. But today is Chongguang's birthday, I wonder what you prepared for him." Before Qin Mu could speak, Zhou Chongguang smiled and said, "Qin Mu had already given it to me when I got up." These words were very light, but they were also quite warm. The old lady glared at him and handed the box to Qin Mu. "Chongguang, go to the kitchen and help." Zhou Chongguang knew that the old lady had something to say. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at Qin Mu. "Wait in the dining room. I'll bring you the noodles when they're ready." Old Madame Zhou couldn't stand it and glared at her son. Zhou Chongguang followed them slowly and looked back at Qin Mu. She was gritting her teeth. He knew that she was angry, but she probably couldn't bring herself to do that in the old mansion. In the kitchen, the old lady boiled the water and prepared the seasoning. Every year on this day, she didn't need to do the servants and made a bowl of noodles for her son to eat. But every year on this day, it was also sad. In the past, she and Chongguang's father made noodles for their son together. Zhou Chongguang leaned on the side and looked at her with a warm expression. "Mom, why are you unhappy?" Chapter 23-25. She turned around and looked at her son. "I have nothing to say about you marrying Qin Mu. But why didn't you agree to divorce her?" Zhou Chongguang wanted to laugh, but he couldn't. He reached into his pocket for a cigarette, but he couldn't find it. She pursed her lips and said softly, "Mom, no matter what, Qin Mu and I haven't divorced yet. How could you bring Xiangqin home? Xiangqin's parents are old friends with us. What's wrong with coming to visit?" Old Mrs. Qin sounded righteous. But Zhou Chongguang didn't say anything. He just looked at his mother. Old Mrs. Qin sighed and finally said, yes, I wanted to mess with you. You probably got wind of it, so you brought Qin back to make me give up, right? Zhou Chongguang smiled faintly. I can't hide anything from you, Mom. Don't try to fool me. Old Mrs. Qin sighed. I know you're powerful now. You can do whatever you want in the business world. Even if Qin wants a divorce, you can settle it. Old Mrs. Qin shook her head. You can even settle the Qin family, let alone an old lady like me. Zhou Chongguang's throat tightened and he said in a deep voice, Mom, what happened in the past wasn't Qin fault. It wasn't her fault, but her surname is Qin. She's Yi Muyun's sister. Old Mrs. Qin sounded agitated. Zhou Chongguang was about to say something when Qin stood at the door. She raised the cup in her hand. Let me pour you a cup of water. His expression was a little ugly. She must have found out. He hesitated for a second before he walked over and took the cup from her hand. Let me pour you a cup. Qin passed the cup to him and Zhou Chongguang poured her a cup of hot water. It was only 10 seconds, and the atmosphere was eerily silent. When he passed it to her, Qin gripped it tightly and said hoarsely, I'll go out first. He instinctively grabbed her hand. Her body swayed a little, and the water in the cup spilled a little. Qin looked down and said nervously, the water is a little hot. Zhou Chongguang took a tissue and cleaned her up bit by bit. In a voice that only she could hear, he said, Can we talk about it when we get back? He really didn't expect that she would hear all this. If she did, he wouldn't have let her come over. It was fine to let her know that there was a woman who had designs on him, but his mother's last sentence was a little hurtful. There was a pleading look in his eyes, begging her not to go. How could he not know that Qin was also a rich young lady? When her temper flared up, there was no need for her to give in to his mother. Besides, she didn't love him now. He was the one who pestered her. Zhou Chongguang now knew that those who loved the most would be worried about gains and losses. Was Qin like this in the past? He was afraid that the slightest mistake would cause the other party to dislike him. He felt a little heartache, but he couldn't express it in front of his mother. He could only smile bitterly and rub her hair. Qin lowered her head and walked out with the cup in her hand. In the kitchen, only the mother and son were left. Zhou Chongguang finally found a cigarette in his coat pocket and lit it. The blue flame made his face look a little gloomy. After a long puff, he said in a low voice, Mom, you saw it. Qin doesn't care anymore. She was invulnerable. If it were in the past, she would probably turn around and leave. But now she didn't care, so she could play along with him. Chapter 23-26. Old Madame Zhou quietly went downstairs. When the noodles were ready, she scooped up 2 bowls. She sounded a little negative. Chongguang, when did you start liking her? For so many years, Chongguang had never cared about Qin. She had thought that when Qin asked for a divorce, Chongguang would probably go along with Qin wishes no matter how unwilling he was. She had never expected that her son would like Qin. Zhou Chongguang smiled bitterly. I don't know either. His voice was low and deep. If I had known that I would like her as much as I did today, I wouldn't have treated her like that in the past. The anger in his heart had lessened a lot, especially when he was facing Qin. All that was left was guilt. A girl who had been with him since she was 14 years old, and when she was 22 years old, she finally couldn't stand it anymore and asked for a divorce. He was a jerk too. When she was in her best years, what he gave her was not love, not a faithful marriage, but one gossip after another. Old Madame Zhou was silent for a long time before she reluctantly said, Chongguang, I know what you're thinking. She paused for a moment. You want to live well with her, but you want me to accept her, right? Zhou Chongguang let out a long puff of smoke and sighed. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm making things difficult for you. Old Madame Zhou raised her head. Mom, there's nothing to be difficult about. But you can't expect me to love her like I love my own daughter. At most, it'll be the same as before. For Zhou Chongguang, this was enough. He reached out and extinguished the cigarette butt. He walked over and hugged the old lady. Mom, I know. I really like her. Old Madame Zhou rolled her eyes at him. All right. Don't give me that. Who hasn't been young before? Old Madame Zhou added, weren't you like this when you liked that girl from the Tang family? That's different. Zhou Chongguang's dark eyes were tinged with warmth. Qin Mu is my wife. In the past, his love for Shui was just an illusion. However, his love for Qin Mu was real. When the old lady heard what he said, she sighed, your father left early, otherwise he would be very happy. She hit her son's shoulder. If Mom agrees, then let Mom have a grandson as soon as possible. My grandson's surname is Zhou. I'll definitely love him. Definitely. Zhou Chongguang smiled. At that time, I'll dote on my grandson's mother too. Old Madame Zhou rolled her eyes at him. Good for nothing. Then, he turned his head and ate another bowl of noodles. At the same time, he instructed his son, the noodles are about to get burnt. Quickly take them out. Your wife is probably starving. Sigh, Qin Mu was obviously a pampered young lady, and her son was treasuring her now. In the future, Chongguang was asking for trouble. However, he asked for it. Zhou Chongguang brought the noodles to the dining room. Qin Mu was playing with her phone when she heard footsteps. Are you done? Yes, it's Mom. Zhou Chongguang's eyes were gentle. He sat down next to her and handed her the chopsticks. Qin Mu took a bite and looked at him with her head tilted. You look so guilty. It's like you have a concubine. He laughed and knocked her on the head. Silly. Even so, he was a little absent-minded. She did not seem angry. However, she was not angry. Zhou Chongguang was angry. He kept quiet with a sullen face. Even the longevity noodles did not taste as good as before. Chapter 23-27. When old Mrs. Zhou came in, she saw them like this and sighed softly. She knew that the fuse was her arrangement today. So after eating the noodles, she drove them away and told them to go wherever they wanted to eat at noon. In the past, Zhou Chongguang would stay at the old house for lunch before leaving, but today he was really not in the mood. He got in the car silently and lit a cigarette. When Qin Mu got in the car, he just glanced at her lightly and started the car. Where are you going? Qin Mu fastened her seatbelt and snorted. I've already given you face. What else do you want? His face became even uglier. The car drove very fast. There were not many cars on the road, so he sped to 120. Qin Mu's little face was a little pale. She clenched her fingers and resisted the urge to vomit. Zhou Chongguang, slow down. He became a little sober. He looked at her sideways and immediately slowed down the car. When the car stopped, Qin Mu immediately opened the door and got out of the car. She bent over and vomited on the side of the road. She had vomited all the noodles she had just eaten. Her stomach was empty and she felt very uncomfortable. Behind her, Zhou Chongguang patted her back, feeling a little guilty. Are you okay? His voice trembled slightly as he gave her a bottle of mineral water. When Qin Mu calmed down a little, she pushed him away and walked weakly towards the car. Zhou Chongguang thought that she was going to get in the car, but she just took out her bag and stood by the side of the road waiting for a taxi. He sighed, walked over, and said in a low voice, "Moo, it's my fault." "Stop it, okay?" Qin Mu pursed her lips and ignored him. "I was too excited." He continued to coax her. "I don't know how to express my concern. Qin Mu, this is the first time I can't control my emotions like this." Because he felt that she didn't love him. Qin Bei finally looked up at him and sneered. "You don't care about me and look for a woman. Is this how you express your concern about me now?" Zhou Chongguang sighed. "Moo, you know what I care about. I told you, I can't force you. Or do you think that when I'm at your house, I should put on a black face so that everyone will look better?" Her little mouth was really powerful. He couldn't say anything for a long time and could only stare at her. But in the end, he still felt heartache and humbled himself even more. "It's my fault." Now that he thought about it, it was a little ridiculous. He reached out and forcefully pulled her into his arms. "Be good, don't make trouble." Qin Mu struggled and scolded, "Zhou Chongguang, you bastard. It was your mother who arranged a matchmaking session for you. It was you who were lonely and wanted to find a second love. Why are you pestering me? Go find your blonde sister. She's waiting for you at home." As she said that, she raised her hand and awkwardly gave him a slap. Zhou Chongguang didn't get angry after taking the hit. Instead, he was happy. It was as if she would like him a little more if she hit him. He hugged her shamelessly and dragged her toward his car. As he dragged her, he said, "I don't like anyone. Moo, I only like you." Qin Mu bit and kicked. "Bastard." At this time, she also revealed her temper. For Qin Mu, today was even more embarrassing than the last time she caught Zhou Chongguang and Lin Shui stealing glances at her. Chapter 23-28. The elders had arranged for him to go on a blind date before they got divorced. This was a problem between the two families, not just the two of them. In other words, she was extremely disapproved of. The old lady of the Zhou family couldn't wait to kick her out of the house. Although Qin Mu didn't care much, she was still hurt. Qin Mu was carried by him and dragged into the car roughly. She scolded him harshly. Zhou Chongguang finally got her into the car. After sitting down, he rubbed his forehead with his palm and smiled bitterly. "Where did you learn to curse? I've never heard you curse before. Is it new? Then I can curse you every day," she said childishly. Zhou Chongguang smiled and put down his hand. "Then I'll do it every day until you cry. Then you can curse again. No one will suffer." Qin Mu glared at him. "Zhou Chongguang, you're shameless. If I'm shameless, how can I get a wife to hug me?" He pinched her little face and sighed. "Mu, stop it. Let's live a good life. Isn't that good?" Qin Mu looked at him silently for a long time before saying, "Drive." He knew that she still cared about it. His mother's words were like a thorn in her heart. She couldn't get rid of it for a while, so he smiled and said, "Watch a movie with me, okay? I remember that Lin Shui has a movie in which she is quite beautiful. Let's go watch it." Qin Mu said deliberately. Zhou Chongguang sighed. "Qin Mu, I'd rather stay in bed with you all day. Let's go watch a movie. After you watch the newly released Fanghua, you will be able to dispel your shameless and excessive hopes." Qin Mu sat up straight and said expressionlessly. Zhou Chongguang smiled. "Qin Mu, don't say that you don't like to make love with me." "I don't like it." She snorted. Zhou Chongguang had already started the car. After a long time, he said faintly, "You don't mean what you say." I'll make you tell me the truth tonight. Qin Mu glared at him, but it was useless. With his thick skin, he seemed to have her in his grasp. Qin Mu didn't know what to do with him. She accompanied him to the movies and went shopping with him, saying that he wanted her to buy a gift. Finally, he came to the men's clothing counter and picked out a thin coat and a cashmere sweater. It was shockingly expensive, but he used his own card. Qin Mu was the one who accompanied him. After he was done, he took her to the women's clothing floor and picked out a set of clothes that was similar to his style. Qin Mu felt that he had ulterior motives, but she endured it for the sake of his credit card. But why did he want to go shopping for pajamas with her? Qin Mu looked at those flamboyant and sexy pajamas. The thin fabric couldn't hide anything at all. She rejected it in her heart and dragged him away. Zhou Chongguang reached out and pulled her into his arms. He pressed his lips against her ear and said, "Didn't you want to give me a present?" Qin Mu bit her lip. "You're going to wear it." "No, you're going to wear it." His voice was unbelievably hot, and it sprayed on her soft neck, causing her to shiver. When they got married, she was only 18 years old. How could she know so much? And these few years, his mind and body weren't on her, so her pajamas were all conservative. How could she have these things? It was his birthday, so he wanted to see her change. Qin Mu glared at him, but her glare was a little weak. "I'm not going to wear it." Chapter 23-29. When Qin Mu wanted to leave, he dragged her along. In the end, she pitifully said that she had no money. Zhou Zong immediately flipped through her wallet and took out her black card. He had made this card for her, but she had never used it. Feeling shy, she stood outside the shop while he went in himself. He picked out a few sets of clothes and swiped his card. In the end, he held the trophies in his hands, completely ignoring the shocked gazes around him. Qin Mu was very thin-skinned. She covered her face, feeling that she had no way of being a decent person. He placed these things in the car and took her shopping for half a day. He planned to go home after dinner. He chose to eat at Zhao Yan's place. Qin Mu felt that he had done it on purpose. When they arrived at the restaurant, Zhao Yan was also there. He immediately saw Zhou Chongguang and Qin Mu walking over. Zhou Zong was holding a bouquet of roses in his arms. Zhao Yan personally came over to greet them. Qin Mu's birthday. Qin Mu narrowed her eyes. Zhou Zong's birthday. So, you gave him flowers. Zhao Yan laughed. Qin Mu flipped through the menu and said calmly, "How is that possible?" Then, Zhou Zong gave it to himself. The smile in Zhao Yan's eyes deepened. However, there was a sense of awkwardness in it that only he knew. His feelings for Qin Mu were so faint that he did not even realize it. It was only after he had casually opened his mouth that he realized that he actually liked her. Just like Guze, he had unknowingly fallen in love with her. If he wanted to pull it out, it would take a long time. If she had divorced Zhou Chongguang, he would still fight for it. However, it was obvious that they had reconciled. There was a hint of sadness in Zhao Yan's eyes. It was something that Qin Mu would never be able to see through. However, Zhou Chongguang could see that Zhao Yan longed for his wife. Zhou Chongguang didn't say anything. He was still smiling, waiting for Qin Mu to finish ordering. Then, he added a little more and invited Zhao Yan to dine together. He was as generous as a loving husband, but only he knew the hidden meaning in his heart. Of course, as a man, Zhao Yan could also sense the difference of 1 meter. They were both smart men, but they had a tacit understanding. Zhao Yan declined, "I still have 2 more songs in a while." After he finished speaking, he got up and prepared to leave. Qin Mu reached out and grabbed his wrist. Zhao Yan. Zhao Yan lowered his head and looked at her hand that was holding his. Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes and looked at his wife. She was right in front of him, holding another man's hand, as if he didn't exist. But at this moment, he couldn't say anything. Zhao Yan whispered, Moo moo. Qin Mu raised her head with a sad expression on her face. Her voice was hoarse. Zhao Yan, when are you leaving? She and Zhao Yan weren't friends, but they were bosom friends. However, Qin Mu never knew that a man was willing to be a bosom friend with a woman because he was interested in that woman. Zhao Yan patted her hand with his other hand. I'll tell you when the time comes. Qin Mu nodded, and there was a hint of tears in her eyes. I'll see you off. Zhao Yan's eyes were tinged with a hint of a smile. He stroked her long hair and said, silly. From the corner of his eyes, he saw that Zhou Chongguang's eyes were already very unfriendly, and he smiled in his heart. Qin Mu would be happy. It seemed that this man already cared about her a lot. Zhao Yan left, and Qin Mu was still staring at him in a daze. Chapter 23:30. If you think that way, I can't do anything about it. Qin Mu finally turned around and looked at him quietly. Zhou Chongguang took her little hand and rubbed it hard. He said unhappily, in the future, don't hold a man's hand so casually. It's not what a good woman does. Then is it what a good husband does when he takes a woman to have sex in the office? Qin Mu's words made him speechless. Zhou Chongguang couldn't do anything about her. For a long time, he could only stare at her and couldn't say a word. Okay, the waiter is coming. I don't want to quarrel with you. Qin Mu's voice was a little low. Zhou Chongguang looked at her and lowered his voice. Mu, this is not a quarrel. I'm the one who's jealous. He said it straightforwardly. Qin Mu looked at him and pursed her lips. She didn't say anything else. Zhou Chongguang smiled because he saw her cheeks blushing. Qin Mu naturally felt his gaze. She looked up and glared at him. Then, she clenched her fists and took a sip of the apéritif. Then, she choked. Her little face was very red. She couldn't embarrass herself in a high-end restaurant. Her embarrassed look was ridiculous and cute. Zhou Chongguang smiled, got up and walked through her side. He pressed her little head into his arms and kissed her hair. Eat something sweet to suppress it. As he said that, he reached out and fed her. Qin Mu didn't have the face to be intimate in the restaurant. She struggled and said, I want to drink water. He smiled, changed a glass of water, and insisted on feeding her a few mouthfuls. Qin Mu finally felt much better. However, he still didn't let go of her. Instead, he lowered his head and kissed her, touching her soft lips little by little. He kissed her carefully. Qin Mu was a little shocked, so she forgot to push him away. Her eyes widened slightly as she looked at the enlarged handsome face. He and she had fought hand-to-hand many times, but they had never experienced such intimacy outside. By the time she reacted, he was already kissing her a little too heavily. The moment she opened her mouth, he took advantage of the situation. The kiss was so deep, so earnest. Qin Mu's fingers tugged hard on his sweater, leaving a long mark on it. She wanted to speak, but every word was crushed and swallowed by him. This kiss was originally just a spur of the moment, but as the kiss deepened, he was also a little moved. After the kiss, he whispered in her ear, I really want to take you away right now. Qin Mu buried her face in his waist and felt that she couldn't be human anymore. Zhou Chongguang looked at the thin layer of clouds behind her ear and fondled it for a while. He said in a slutty voice, a kiss in a high-class restaurant is nothing. Besides, we are husband and wife, okay? Qin Mu's legs were still a little weak. She fell into his arms and didn't get up for a long time. A special feeling of contentment arose in Zhou Chongwang's heart. It was similar to the feeling of having a little girl and a wife, and being satisfied for the rest of his life. Knowing that she was shy, he reached out and hugged her in his arms, but his eyes were on Zhao Yan. Zhao Yan had just played a song and made 6 mistakes. The reason was in his arms. Friends. Zhou Chongwang laughed coldly. Just as he was hugging Qin Mu, there were 2 women sitting not far away. They were both quite beautiful, but one of them had a particularly foul expression. Chapter 23:31. Lin Shui retracted her gaze lazily and glared at the junior model. She said nonchalantly, "I'm not looking anymore. Look at how the husband and wife are doing. Their relationship is so good." The junior model's voice became even softer. "Didn't you say that you and Zhou Zong were captured alive by his wife in her office and she asked for a divorce?" Lin Shui bit her delicate fingernails. She sounded a little impatient. Who knows if this woman is playing hard to get? The junior model's gaze was still fixed on that spot. She seemed to be talking to herself. But it doesn't seem like it. No matter how I look at it, it seems like Zhou Zong cares a little more. It seems like he's fawning over his wife. Just as she finished speaking, she realized that she had said something wrong and immediately stopped talking. Lin Shui tossed her head. Why don't I say it? There was still some unwillingness in her tone. After all, before this, she had been quite interested in this handsome, rich, and powerful man. Of course, she knew that he had always had an indifferent attitude towards her. Otherwise, he would not have kicked her away after the backyard fire. She had not expected that he would not have kicked her away after the backyard fire. Lin Shui stood up abruptly. Her friend held her back and said nervously, "Lin Shui, what are you doing? Don't do anything stupid." Because a person like Zhou Chongwang wasn't someone small artists like them could afford to offend. Lin Shui raised her glass and smiled. "Don't worry, I won't. I just want to disgust him a little." The junior model watched as Lin Shui walked over to Zhou Chongwang's table. She immediately packed her bag and decided to go to the restroom. Lin Shui was stupid. She didn't want to be stupid with her. She still wanted to work in the entertainment industry. Moreover, she had just signed with King Entertainment and Qin Mu was the heiress of King Entertainment. She really couldn't afford to offend someone like that. Meanwhile, Lin Shui had already walked over with her glass. Her voice was sweet and moving. "Zhou Zong, what a coincidence." Zhou Chongwang had already returned to his seat. He looked up and his gaze froze. Then his gaze landed on Qin Mu's face. Qin Mu pursed her lips, her face expressionless. However, he could feel that her hands, which were holding the knife and fork, were slightly trembling. It was not that she did not care. With such a discovery, he felt a little heartache, but there was also a faint joy in his heart. But now, he had to deal with Lin Shui first. Zhou Chongwang nodded reservedly. "Miss Lin." Lin Shui was stunned. She thought that Zhou Chongwang would ignore her. If that was the case, she would have achieved her goal, which was to disgust him. It was even more disgusting to Qin Mu. However, she didn't know what to do. After a long time, she squeezed out a sentence, "I hope Zhou Zong will show mercy to me in the future." She raised the glass of wine and toasted Zhou Chongwang. If Zhou Chongwang were to drink this wine, he would have to kneel on the abacus when he went back. Moreover, there was probably no hope for his ex life tonight. Zhou Chongwang glanced at Qin Mu with a comforting look in his eyes. It was the warmth of a husband towards his wife. When he looked up at Lin Shui again, it was very cold. Miss Lin, you're being too serious. I'm not your boss. I'm not promoting you, nor am I showing mercy. He paused for a moment before continuing, Miss Lin, please leave some leeway for yourself when you do things. I don't think you'll be driven into a corner. He was being so magnanimous because he didn't want to tangle with Lin Shui anymore. If he did, it would only worsen his marriage with Qin Mu. He was being so gracious in front of Qin Mu so that the situation wouldn't be too embarrassing. Chapter 23:32. Zhou Chongwang had made it very clear that he wanted her to leave some leeway. No matter how stupid she was, she knew that she shouldn't piss him off anymore. Lin Shui said with difficulty, sorry to disturb Zhou Zong, and Mrs. Zhou. Qin Mu didn't turn around, nor did she pay attention to her. It wasn't that Qin Mu was snobbish, but she really didn't need to be nice to the third party in a marriage. As for Zhou Chongwang's romantic debt, he could deal with it himself. She still had the same words. She didn't want to force herself. Seeing her like this, Zhou Chongwang smiled faintly, moved her plate over, and personally cut the steak for her. Eat more, you've lost weight recently. Qin Mu also let him serve her. Lin Shui, who was standing to the side, let out a bitter smile after a while. She suddenly understood that it wasn't that Zhou Chongwang didn't like Qin Mu, but that Qin Mu didn't ask for anything from him. Once Qin Mu showed that she cared about him, the man would be overjoyed, as if he had gotten a rare treasure. All these years, he hadn't been hiding Tang's share in his heart, but Qin Mu. It was just that he had never felt it himself. The couple liked each other, but they had been torturing each other for 4 years before Qin Mu exploded. From then on, there was no one else in Zhou Chongwang's eyes. Lin Shui left sadly. Zhou Chongwang retracted his gaze without batting an eyelid and pushed the cut steak towards her. Qin Mu forked a piece of beef and ate it. He raised his gaze slightly and looked at him, very disappointed. Of course not. Zhou Chongwang smiled and didn't think much of it. He thought to himself that he would not argue with his jealous wife. Qin Mu smiled and said, it's your birthday today. I can make you a wish, find a woman to spend a romantic night with? Zhou Chongwang picked up the wine glass and took a sip. Qin Mu smiled but didn't say anything. Zhou Chongwang was a little annoyed, but he still had a gentle smile on his face. Then I choose you. Qin Mu snorted. Childish. Zhou Chongwang got up slightly and pinched her chin with his slender and well-defined fingers. His gaze was deep and serene. In public, Zhou Zong, please take care of your lower half. Qin Mu rolled her eyes at him. However, he used a little more strength, and there was a hint of warmth in that strength. Then, he said in a low and hoarse voice, baby, you really know me well, huh? Shameless. Qin Mu reached out and gently pushed his hand away. Then she got up and said, I'm going to the bathroom. Zhou Chongwang smiled wickedly and patted her little face. Hurry up. Qin Mu glared at him. You're becoming more and more like a greasy middle-aged man. After saying that, she turned around and left. Zhou Chongwang smiled and drank the wine in one gulp. Qin Mu walked to the bathroom slowly. She just wanted to wash her face. When she looked up, Lin Shui's figure appeared in the mirror. Qin Mu was still washing her hands slowly. She said indifferently, Lin Shui, are you following me to show off your past with Zhou Chongwang? After washing her hands, she wiped them gently and turned around. I've seen everything that I should have seen. Lin Shui pursed her lips and said dryly, I don't believe that you don't care. Of course I care. Qin Mu looked at her and said calmly, but it's not that important to me anymore. Chapter 23:33. Lin Shue's face turned pale. Of course, she understood. A girl like Qin Mu did not need to bow down to any man. Even if it was a man like Zhou Chongguang who had a good figure, good looks, and was rich, it was normal for him to have an affair. However, Qin Mu did not want it when she said she did not want it. When she said that Qin Mu was playing hard to get, she was actually deceiving herself. She knew and could see how much effort Zhou Chongguang had put in to win back this pampered ex-wife. Qin Mu was also rich and good-looking. Even after leaving Zhou Chongguang, she was still pursued by many men. Lin Shuai pursed her lips and did not say a word in the end. When Qin Mu turned around, she paused for a moment. Even if I divorce Zhou Chongguang, Lin Shuai, he will not marry you. Lin Shuai's face froze. Why did she hear a hint of bitterness in Qin Mu's tone? Shouldn't Qin Mu be proud at this moment? The wife had won and the man had gone home. Qin Mu glanced at her and smiled faintly. In the end, she walked past her and returned to the dining room. When she returned, she saw that Zhou Chongguang had already put on his coat and was holding hers in his hand. She walked over and he put it on her naturally. He said faintly, "It's getting late. Let's go back." After Qin Mu put on her coat, he helped her carry her bag. After taking 2 steps, Qin Mu suddenly paused and said, "I'll talk to Zhao Yan." Zhou Chongguang did not object and said in a gentlemanly manner, "I'll wait for you outside." Qin Mu glanced at him and he smiled. "I'm willing to give you enough space. Do you want an equal exchange?" After saying that, Qin Mu ignored him and walked straight to Zhao Yan. Zhao Yan was lighting a cigarette and chatting with a friend. When he saw Qin Mu coming over, he smiled. "Are you going back?" Qin Mu nodded and thought for a moment before asking, "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow." Zhao Yan's gaze was deep. Qin Mu was stunned. She stared at him for a long time without saying anything. "Then I'll send you off," Qin Mu said softly, then looked at him. He was a very important friend to her. The day before yesterday, he had joked with her. She had ignored it, but she was a mature woman. How could she not feel his feelings? But she couldn't bear it. Qin Mu pursed her lips and looked up at him. Zhou Zong, on the other hand, had not left yet. He kept looking at her, and his heart ached a little. His wife was looking at another man with her eyes wide open. In the end, he chose to wait outside so that he wouldn't be annoyed. About 10 minutes later, Qin Mu walked out of the restaurant. Zhou Chongguang grabbed her little hand and pulled her into his arms. He said in a low voice, "It's cold." Qin Mu looked up. "I don't feel cold." Zhou Chongguang looked at her and quietly held her hand as they walked to his car. After Qin Mu got into the car, she kept quiet. But after about 5 minutes, she realized that this was not the way back to the villa. She turned and looked at him. "Zhou Chongguang, where do you want to go?" "Tonight at the hotel." His gaze was focused ahead. He took a moment to glance at her and smiled. "Didn't you say that you were going to make a wish for me?" Qin Mu bit her lip. "Can you be more shameless? A man wants to make love to his wife. How is that shameless? Besides, today is my birthday. Isn't it a wife's duty to fulfill one of my wishes?" He laughed a little too much and pulled out his hand to rub her long hair. Chapter 23:34. Zhou Chongguang drove the car into the parking lot of a 6-star hotel. He didn't get out immediately. Instead, he locked the car door and unbuckled his seatbelt slowly. He turned to look at her. "What did you talk about with Zhao Yan?" Qin Mu patted the car door. "Open the door. I'll let you go after a few words." His tone was indifferent. Qin Mu was a little angry. She leaned against the back of the seat and said softly, "Tomorrow." "Okay, I'll drive you tomorrow." "You have to send him off." Zhou Chongwang said this with a deeper meaning. Then, Qin Mu was a little annoyed. "I'll go myself." "I don't need you." Zhou Chongwang's expression was still indifferent. He then chuckled. "Okay." This time, he opened the car door and let her get out. He didn't seem to be afraid that she would run away. Qin Mu turned to look at him and got out of the car as well. She wasn't a little girl anymore. She naturally knew what it meant to get out of the car with him. It meant that he wouldn't let her go tonight. Usually, Zhou Chongwang's desire would be very strong. It was the kind that would accumulate until it exploded. Qin Mu walked in front. Zhou Chongwang took out the things from the trunk and grabbed 2 bottles of red wine. When they arrived at the hotel lobby, he shamelessly asked for a presidential suite. Qin Mu stood beside him and played with her hair. The receptionist looked at the 2 of them and quickly registered them. She took the room card and led the way. "No need, I'll go upstairs myself," Zhou Chongwang said indifferently. The receptionist was stunned for a moment. Then, she thought of the special hobbies of some customers. She smiled and said nothing. Qin Mu looked at Zhou Chongwang and took the room card from his hand unhappily. Her voice was like a little lamb. "Zhou Chongwang, are you a pervert?" He held the things in one hand and put the other on her shoulder. He kissed her lips. "I'll let you know whether I'm a pervert or not." Qin Mu was playing with her long hair absent-mindedly. She used to have straight black hair, but it had recently been dyed brown and slightly curled, giving her a more mature look. Zhou Chongwang looked at her dazed face and guessed that she was probably sad for Zhao Yan. Annoyed, he pressed her against the door and kissed her. He took the room card from her hand and swiped it to open the door. As they kissed and rubbed, they somehow ended up on the carpet. Zhou Chongwang opened the cork of the red wine bottle with his teeth and raised his head to take a sip. He pinched her chin with one hand and kissed her lips. He slowly fed the dark red wine to her and pestered her to drink it. After a few times, Qin Mu was slightly drunk, but he wasn't much better. His white shirt was stained with dark red, and he looked a little slutty. He couldn't help calling her name and kissing her again and again. He felt that his feelings for her had already filled his whole heart, but he didn't dare to confess it easily. He was afraid that she would mock him. He could actually feel fear in his heart. As Zhou Chongwang was in a daze, Qin Mu suddenly pressed against his shoulder and pushed him away. Her eyes were full of charm. It was the Qin Mu that Zhou Chongwang had never seen before. "Didn't you want to see me wear pajamas?" Qin Mu raised her body and whispered in his ear. Zhou Chongwang's beast blood was boiling. Although he had such intentions before, he really didn't expect his little wife to be willing to wear such pajamas for him. Chapter 23:35. When she came out, Zhou Chongwang felt that the beast in his body had awakened. He almost couldn't control himself and walked toward her. He pressed her against the wall and lowered his head to kiss her. That night, Qin Mu changed into 5 sets of pajamas, and Zhou Zong was exhausted. When the sky was just beginning to brighten, Zhou Chongwang hugged her and kissed her. His voice was low and hoarse. "Mumu, you've learned bad things." It was simply killing him. Qin Mu was so tired that she wanted to sleep. She hugged him and said in a daze, "I want to take a shower. I'm not feeling well." His eyes were full of gentleness. At this moment, even if she wanted the moon in the sky, he would probably be willing to pluck it for her. Although he was very tired, he still carried her to the bathroom and carefully helped her wash up. Then, he wrapped her in a bathrobe and returned to the big bed in the bedroom. He was also tired, but he was so excited that he didn't feel sleepy. He went to the balcony and smoked 2 cigarettes. He looked at the sky and carefully felt the satisfaction in his heart. Only then did he realize that this was how it felt to like someone. He wished that he could give his all to her. He wanted to keep her by his side at all costs. When he returned to the bedroom again, he kissed her on the lips. Although Chin-moo was asleep, she could still smell the cigarette in his mouth. She moved uncomfortably to express her dissatisfaction. He smiled and finally lay down beside her. He held her in his arms and kissed her. He pressed his lips against her little face. "Moo-moo, don't leave me, okay? We're not getting a divorce." Chin-moo was asleep, so of course she wouldn't answer. Even if she was awake, she probably wouldn't say anything good. Sometimes, Zhou Chongguang didn't understand why he liked her. They had been together for so many years, and there wasn't much of a reaction. However, when she said that she wanted a divorce, that she was disappointed in him, and that there would be no relationship in the future, he was extremely unwilling. It wasn't until later that he realized that this kind of unwillingness, this kind of habit, was called love. Because she was extremely tired, Chin-moo didn't wake up until 10:00 in the morning. When she opened her eyes, she was hit by the glaring sunlight outside. Her eyes widened and she suddenly bounced up. Her legs were extremely sore. Lying down with his hands covering his eyes, Shanine said, "Zhou Chongguang, get up." As she spoke, her body was pulled into his arms. Zhou Chongguang kissed her little face and said with a smile, "Didn't you say you were going to the airport by yourself?" Chin-moo wrapped her arms around his neck and bit him hard. She gritted her teeth and said, "What do you think?" Her legs hurt so much that she couldn't even walk. How could she drive? Zhou Chongguang chuckled in a low voice. He was so happy that he actually pressed her down again. His eyes were smiling. "Be good. Beg me. Shameless." Chin-moo turned her face to the side. "Zhou Chongguang, if you're not willing, I'll find someone else, or I'll stop Xiao Yan from leaving." How could she not know about his dark thoughts? He had dragged her around for an entire night just because he didn't want her to send Xiao Yan off. Zhou Chongguang's gaze deepened. He bent down and kissed her little mouth. "You didn't say, 'Happy birthday,' to me last night." Chin-moo stretched out her leg and kicked him. She was a little annoyed. "Zhou Chongguang, don't you think you're annoying?" He reached out and pressed her down, not letting her move. There was a hint of a smile in his voice. "You think I'm annoying?" "Xiao Yan, don't you think he's annoying, huh?" There was a hint of danger in his eyes. Chin-moo bit her lip. She knew that if she didn't confess, he probably wouldn't let her go. Chapter 23:36. Zhou Chongguang's body froze for a moment. Then, he hugged her tightly and buried his face in her neck. He said in a low voice, "Don't go to see Xiao Yan, okay? Stay with me." Chin-moo was a little surprised. Was he acting coquettishly? After a while, she blinked and leaned back. "I promised him." Zhou Chongguang's gaze was deep and serene. "You won't go back on what you've promised, huh?" Chin-moo didn't suspect anything. She nodded gently. "Yes." But then, she was kissed by him. Then, he tortured her with all kinds of methods. He didn't want to use them in the past, but he couldn't bear to use them on her later on. Chin-moo wanted to die. "Promise me that you'll stay in the hotel and make love with me today, okay?" he said passionately as he bit her little ear. Chin-moo grabbed his shoulder with her little hand and cried, "Zhou Chongguang. You bastard!" Zhou Chongguang chuckled. He grabbed her little hands and pressed them on both sides of his body. Then, he bullied her to his heart's content. Qin Mu bit her lips and closed her eyes. She endured it. That wasn't all. He bullied her while coaxing her. Stay with me, okay? Qin Mu was so angry that she bit down hard on his neck. Her little violence had successfully ignited a man's animalistic nature. It messed up the rhythm, and he was almost brutal. But in the end, he still took her to the airport. Qin Mu covered her neck with a turtleneck. Because it was full of strawberries, Qin Mu glared at him as she walked. Then, she was horrified to find that this shameless man was only wearing a low-neck sweater with cotton clothes on the outside. There was a heavy hickey on his neck, which was dazzling. Qin Mu stopped walking. Zhou Chongguang, you did it on purpose. There was a look of accusation in her eyes. I've told you, Xiao Yan is just an ordinary friend. If you act like this, you won't have any friends. He put his hand in his pocket and said nonchalantly, I only need you as a friend, someone who can play special games in bed with me. Qin Mu blushed and glared at him. Zhou Chongguang pulled her closer and murmured, Mu, I'm jealous. Can't you feel it? Qin Mu kicked his leg and ran forward. After running a few steps, his leg really hurt, so he stopped. He placed his hands beside his leg and took deep breaths. What's wrong? Zhou Chongguang walked over and asked gently as he supported her. Qin Mu bit her lip and glared at him, but her eyes were watery and teary. My leg hurts. He smiled, reached out to carry her body, and walked forward. Qin Mu grabbed his shoulder and felt embarrassed. She said in a low voice, Enough, Zhou Chongguang. You may be shameless, but I'm shameless. There were too many people watching. She buried her face in his arms and pretended not to see. Zhou Chongguang just smiled and said, Didn't you say your leg hurts? Qin Mu didn't say anything. She was carried in his arms and walked for a few hundred meters. When he put her down, she turned her head and saw Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan was alone. He had probably just checked in the plane ticket. He looked a little lonely. Xiao Yan. Qin Mu called his name softly. Xiao Yan looked back at her and pursed his lips slightly. Then, his gaze became a little deep. His gaze fell on Zhou Chongguang, and he naturally saw the hickey on his neck. Chapter 23:37. Qin Mu slowly scratched her hair and said in a low voice, You're a little late. If you don't come, we can sit down and talk for a while. Xiao Yan raised his hand and looked at the time. I still have 40 minutes to board the plane. I can have 30 minutes. His eyes were a little burning. Mu, do you have time? In front of Zhou Chongguang, he didn't hesitate to call her by her nickname. Zhou Chongguang, who was listening from the side, felt very uncomfortable. Qin Mu was a little dazed. After a long time, she said in a low voice, Okay. She looked back at Zhou Chongguang and said hesitantly, Then wait for me in the car. I'll go to the cafe in front with Xiao Yan. Zhou Chongguang smiled. I'll wait here. But in his heart, his wife was openly chatting with a wild man in front of him. Did he not satisfy her last night? Or did he not satisfy her this morning? Xiao Yan smiled, put his arm around Qin Mu's shoulder and took her away. Of course, he also saw that Zhou Zong's face had turned black. It was really rare. He smiled in his heart. After entering the cafe, Qin Mu looked up and saw her husband standing outside, looking very handsome. He saw that Qin Mu was looking at him and even smiled generously. Qin Mu felt a little embarrassed. When he looked down, Xiao Yan said in a low voice, You seem to get along very well. Just like that. Qin Mu took a sip of coffee and said, It's not that easy between me and him. It doesn't mean that I forgive him and let bygones be bygones. There are too many factors. For example, Zhao Yan looked up and his eyes were deep. Qin Mu also looked at him and wanted to smile, but she couldn't. After a long time, she said bitterly, "My brother always indirectly caused his father's death. His mother doesn't like me, and Zhou Chongwang and I have never had a child. You don't think about having one." Zhao Yan also picked up his cup and took a sip. His gaze deepened. "I can see that he cares a lot about you now." Qin Mu quietly tasted the coffee. It tasted a little bitter because she didn't add sugar. Zhao Yan gently picked up 2 cubes of sugar and gently stirred it for her. Sometimes, people really shouldn't force themselves. Qin Mu lowered her head and took a sip. It wasn't as bitter as before. She smiled. "Maybe I haven't thought about it yet." "Yes, follow your heart." He kept looking at her with a smile. Qin Mu finally realized that when she came to send Zhao Yan off, he seemed to be concerned about her. She couldn't bear his kindness, because she only treated him as a friend. Even if she divorced, Zhao Yan was not someone she dared to consider. He was so good. In Qin Mu's heart, he was like Zhou Chongwang in the past. His existence was like moonlight. It was fine as long as she enjoyed it. She had already lost too much this time around. Qin Mu didn't drink any more coffee. She quickly put down the cup and looked up at Zhao Yan. "You should board the plane." Zhao Yan was still sitting there, looking at her quietly. Suddenly, he said, "Qin Mu, can you hug me?" Qin Mu was stunned for a moment. Then, she got up and walked to Zhao Yan's back, hugging him gently. Zhao Yan was sitting in front of her, so he could see Zhou Chongwang's darkened face. It was really exciting. Chapter 23:38. Zhou Chongwang was about to go crazy. He crumpled the cigarette in his hand and stared at the man and woman who were entangled. This was his wife he was looking for. Although his eyes were burning, Zhou Chongwang didn't dare to come in and separate them. He could only watch, his eyes full of jealousy. Zhao Yan let go of Qin Mu and patted her. His voice was a little hoarse. "All right, Mu Mu, I'll be leaving first." Qin Mu looked up at him. Zhao Yan's gaze deepened and he smiled. "Stand here and don't move. Be good." It was the first time he had spoken like this. Qin Mu wanted to cry. "Don't be like this. I'll be back in the future." Zhao Yan's voice was very low. He reached out and pinched her face. "I'm leaving. Stand here and watch me leave." After saying that, he took another deep look at her, picked up the plane ticket on the table, turned around, and strode out. He didn't look back. Qin Mu stood there and looked at him. She felt that the memories of her and Zhao Yan were slowly fading away. To Alice was still ringing in her ears. It was Zhao Yan who had played it for her. Zhao Yan was different from Zhou Chongwang. The memories that Zhao Yan had given her were all beautiful, until now. She kept looking at his back until he disappeared from her sight. She was hugged into a warm embrace. It was Zhou Chongwang. "All right, it's not like we won't be able to see each other in the future." Zhou Chongwang coaxed her stiffly. Qin Mu looked up at him and said slowly, "Then if you sponsor his concert in the future, he'll probably have time to come back." Zhou Chongwang looked at his wife for a long time before he said slowly, "Qin Mu, do you think I'm that generous? Sponsoring his love rival? He must be crazy." Qin Mu pouted and walked out of the cafe. Zhou Chongwang followed her slowly and held her hand. "Are you angry?" Before Qin Mu could reply, he smiled and said, "I'm not angry with you. She glared at him and tried to struggle, but to no avail. In the end, she gave up. After all, she had done more embarrassing things before. Zhou Chengwang held her little hand and tilted his head to look at her. His expression unconsciously became gentle. Guarding a girl like this was actually so wonderful. Just as they were about to walk out of the airport, they met an acquaintance. Gu Zhe and Gu Mei. Gu Mei, who was supposed to be in France, leaned against Gu Zhe with a pale face. Beside her was a small suitcase. When the two groups of people met face to face, there was quite a bit of surprise. Qin Mu tilted her head and looked at Zhou Chengwang. Her voice was very soft. Didn't you say she went to France? Won't they come back without your orders? Zhou Chengwang was about to explain when Gu Mei said softly, Zhou Zong, I resign. Zhou Chengwang was obviously stunned. Gu Mei smiled a little sadly. I don't want to live in France anymore. Then, she looked at Qin Mu. In the end, I still lost to you. She had been by Zhou Chengwang's side for so many years. She had always been watching. She had thought that one day, Zhou Chengwang would have a showdown with Qin Mu and that there would be a place for her by his side. She had not expected that when Qin Mu had a showdown, she and Zhou Chengwang's other women had all become cannon fodder. Qin Mu looked at Gu Mei and pursed her lips. She did not say a word and walked towards the exit. Zhou Chengwang wanted to chase after her, but he paused for a moment. Secretary Gu, if you want to resign, go to the company to settle the paperwork as soon as possible. Chapter 2339. Of course, she also saw the hickey on his neck. It was so heavy and intense. She had sex with Zhou Chengwang before. She knew that he wasn't a man who liked women to leave marks on his body. She didn't know it before, but now she understood. At that time, he did it because of Qin Mu. He didn't want to let Qin Mu see the hickey on his body when he went home and made love to Qin Mu. It was just that simple. Now, not only did Gu Mei see it, but Gu Zhe also saw it. His eyes were slightly dark and his voice was cold. Zhou Zong's suggestion is also my hope. His gaze still swept past Zhou Chengwang's neck, and his eyes were slightly cold. After a while, he still left with Gu Mei. Zhou Chengwang stood for a while and walked towards the exit. About 2 minutes later, he caught up with Qin Mu. Her little face was tense, and she walked in front of him, ignoring him. Zhou Chengwang sighed and reached out to grab her hand, not letting her go any further. Qin Mu took a step back and looked up at him. Zhou Chengwang, what do you want? I don't want anything. He stroked her long hair gently and said in a low voice, Mumu, I just don't want you to be sad, especially for my past mistakes. He kissed her hair. You shouldn't be the one to bear my mistakes. Qin Mu didn't say anything, and her little face was still tense. Zhou Chengwang sighed. He knew that this anger would probably last for a long time. He held her hand and went to the parking lot, where they met Gu Zhe again. Gu Zhe was closing the car door for Gu Mei. When he saw them coming, his gaze was a little deep. And Qin Mu, for some reason, looked at Gu Zhe and broke free from Zhou Chengwang's hand. Zhou Chengwang narrowed his eyes slightly. He looked at Gu Zhe, and then looked at Qin Mu. There was a faint anger in his heart. Then, his face darkened and he suddenly opened the car door. After Qin Mu got into the car, the sound of him closing the car door was also quite loud. He had lost his temper and eaten enough vinegar. Gu Zhe, on the other hand, had a bitter look in his eyes. Then, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Even a person like Zhou Chengwang could be controlled by Qin Mu. Qin Mu just made a small movement, and Zhou Chengwang almost went crazy. How could Qin Mu have any thoughts about him? Gu Zhe smiled and got into the car. Zhou Chengwang's gaze was almost ferocious as he got into the car. Then, he tilted his head and looked at Qin Mu. You like him? Qin Mu gently played with her long hair. Her voice was a little lazy. Who are you talking about? Zhou Chengwang gritted his teeth. Gu Zhe. Oh. Qin Mu's voice was dragged out. Really? Why did you break free from my hand just now? For Zhou Chengwang, that night in Yunnan, when Qin Mu and Gu Zhe sat by the seaside for the whole night, it was a lingering doubt in his heart. Gu Zhe was not like Zhao Yan. Even though he could see that Zhao Yan liked Qin Mu a little, it was the kind of affection that would not force her. But Gu Zhe was different. Gu Zhe was unfathomable. Even Zhou Chengwang did not dare to look down on him today. Especially after so many years, Gu Zhe had not had a girlfriend. Zhou Chengwang's eyes were a little burning. He stared at her for a long time before he said coldly, "It's best if he's not." Qin Mu sighed. "If I like him, Zhou Chengwang, do you think you can stop me?" Zhou Chengwang narrowed his eyes. "Drive." Qin Mu's voice was very faint, and it sounded like she was sighing. Chapter 2340. The car drove straight back to the villa. Qin Mu got out of the car first, and Zhou Chengwang followed behind her. As they walked, he asked the servants to bring the things in the trunk upstairs. Zhou Chengwang took off his coat as he walked, put it across his arm, and quickly chased after Qin Mu. Qin Mu also walked faster and directly went upstairs. Then, he threw the door plank at him. He stood at the door and looked at the closed door. He was a little confused, but then he shook his head, smiled, and twisted the door. No one could open it. At this time, the servants downstairs also came upstairs with the things. They were a little surprised to see the man locked outside the door. Zhou Chengwang tugged at his tie and said in a low voice, "Give me the key." The servant nodded. "Don't leave." After a while, the servant came up and handed the key to Zhou Chengwang. He stood guard at the side. Zhou Chengwang looked at him and frowned. "Leave." It was obvious that Qin Mu wanted to quarrel with him, and they couldn't let the servant see a couple quarrel. The servant immediately left, but after a few steps, he turned back and looked at them worriedly. Only then did Zhou Chengwang remember that the servants in this villa were all brought by Qin Mu from the Qin family, so they were naturally on her side. He pursed his thin lips and narrowed his eyes. The servant took a few steps forward and left. Zhou Chengwang opened the door with the key and carried the things in. It was almost 9 o'clock, and the bedroom was lit with warm yellow light. As soon as he entered, he smelled a faint fragrance. It was the smell of Qin Mu. His heart couldn't help but soften a little. He put down the things and walked towards her. Qin Mu was drinking water with her back to him. She didn't seem to care when she heard the sound of the door opening. When he walked over, she turned her head and looked at him quietly. Zhou Chengwang also saw that there was not only water in her hand, but also contraceptive pills. However, he had replaced them. He frowned, stepped forward, and hugged her from behind. His voice was a little hoarse. "Mumu, don't take the medicine. Let's have a baby." Qin Mu didn't move. After a while, she said in a low voice, "You've said this before, and I've also said it before. I haven't thought about it yet." He bit the back of her ear and said in a warm voice, "Is it because you're wavering? Is it because Zhao Yan and Gu Zhe have feelings for you that Mrs. Zhou feels that she has more choices?" His voice turned cold. "Yeah, none of them have such a ridiculous past like me, so they're tempted, huh?" He bit her maliciously, and the more he said, the more convinced he was. Qin Mu's body was a little stiff. He then took a deep breath and pushed Zhou Chongguang away fiercely. That's right, Zhou Chongguang, you are right. That's exactly what I think. She looked at him. Do you know how I feel when I look at Lin Shuai and Gu Mei? She stared into his eyes and said word by word, I feel extremely disgusted. Zhou Chongguang's expression was a little twisted as he stared into her eyes. Qin Mu still sneered. That's what you want to know. Did I disgust you? He reached out to grab her, and the next second, she fell into his arms. He bit her lips and said in a very low voice, Qin Mu, when you were moaning under me, why didn't you think I was disgusting, huh? He rubbed against her, deliberately torturing her. Qin Mu's eyes widened slightly, and then she struggled violently. Zhou Chongguang, you're shameless. Let go of me. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.